Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order of the Zoning Board of Appeals. By way of introduction, I'll briefly explain the purpose of the Board of Appeals to the audience. The city has adopted a set of zoning ordinances. If a property or owner applicant wishes relief for a portion of the ordinance, state law provides for an avenue of appeals, hence the name Zoning Board of Appeals. The Zoning Board must find that 4 conditions exist in reviewing an application in order to grant the variance. If all 4 conditions are met, the board can grant approval for the variance from the ordinance. The 4 conditions that must be met are extraordinary or exceptional circumstances, which apply to this parcel and this parcel alone. 2, preservation of rights that a similarly zoned parcel would have. 3, no detriment to the adjacent properties. 4, the request is not of such general nature that the ordinance should be changed. Unlike a decision by the Planning Commission that must be approved or can be overturned by the City Commission, the decision by the Board of Zoning Appeals is final. There is no review or opportunity for overturning by the City Commission. Zoning Enabling Act provides that Section 606(3), an appeal from a decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals shall be filed within 30 days after the Zoning Board of Appeals issues its decision in writing, signed by the chairperson, if there is a chairperson, or signed by the members of the Zoning Board of Appeals. If there is no chairperson, or within 21 days after the Zoning Board of Appeals approved the minutes of its decision, the court may affirm, reverse, or modify the decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals. The court may make other orders as justice requires. Okay, we have minutes that need to be approved from August 25th.
I make a motion to approve the meeting minute.
Red light.
Sorry. Make a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting as written.
Okay, motion by Roger,
I'll support.
support by Pat. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved.
I have a question. Trish, is this something you need? Let's slow down. It's a mouse. Is it some, let's just leave it here?
I have all my settings.
Okay. Okay, sorry.
That's fine. Okay, applicant Mark Stubbs, property owner, property address 3381 Remembrance Road, parcel 41-13-17-476-016, zoning district C3 and A. Type of appeal is dimensional variance request. Size of parcel is 14,374 square feet. Ordinance section request and relief from is 94-467. Table required for off-street parking spaces. Okay, I'll run through here, then I'll get to the applicant. So the applicant, Mr. Mark Stubbs, owner of 3381 Remembrance Road, has submitted application for variance from section 94-467, table of required off-street parking space, to allow for 12 spaces where 27 spaces are required for his business, Smoke Shack Barbecue. Mr. Stubbs has provided the following findings for his request. Under exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions applying to the property in question as to the intended use of the property that do not apply generally to other properties in the same zoning district, the applicant states, in this case, there was exceptional or extraordinary circumstances due to physical constraints of the lot being substandard in size. The lot is 0.33 acres in size, 14,374 square feet. Today's minimum lot size in C3 zoning district is 20,000 square feet. B, preservation of rights. That such a variance is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property right similar to that possessed by other properties in the same zoning district and in the vicinity. The possibility of increased financial return shall not itself be deemed sufficient to warrant a variance. The applicant's response: the single objective of the proposed outdoor seating is to encourage walking and bike pedestrians to have a spot to meet up on the corridor utilizing the community seating regardless of purchase at the said business. C, detriment. That authorizing such variance will not be a substantial detriment to the adjacent property, will not materially impair the intent and purpose of this chapter or the public interest. Applicant's response: there was no substantial detriment to either of the adjacent properties. In fact, easement to the said property has been filed. Easement to said property has been filed to allow two-way traffic flow between said property and the neighboring Lost Art Brewery. And D, that the condition or situation of the piece of property or the intended use of said property for which the variance is sought is not of such so general of recurrent a nature as to make reasonably practical for the formation of generally regulation of such condition or situation. Applicant's response: the current formation is not reasonably practical in allowance of pedestrian patrons. Okay. Trish, do you have anything to add?
I do. I have a lot of things to add. So, thank you, Chair Bolins, Vice Chair Bolins. We have Mark Stubbs with us tonight, the applicant, who is requesting, as you mentioned, variance from section 94-467 for the purpose of his barbecue business, which I'm sure he'll have a chance to talk about a little bit more, but essentially he would like to redevelop the site so that he can run his barbecue business there in the existing building, primarily as a takeout. But you would also like to provide seats for people who wish to eat inside or outside. And at the beginning of this whole thing, when I say whole thing, I mean before he applied for the Planning Commission site plan review, he had noted that he had hoped to have sort of a reciprocal relationship with the neighboring land use, the Lost Art Brewery. And so we'll get into all that stuff at some point during this meeting. But simply the request is for relief from 94-467, and he's requesting to have 12 parking spaces where 27 is required by ordinance. So a little bit more background about this property. The property is dual zoned C3 and A, which is a little bit different from most C3 zoned properties that have C3 land uses on them or other commercial land uses. I wasn't able to fully figure out why the zoning is the way it is, but because during the site plan review process, I had looked into whether or not it would be feasible or reasonable to rezone the entire property to C3. And I was basically told that it's like that for a reason, and the people on the other side in the residential street behind this site like it that way. And that's really all the information that I have. I looked really hard to try and figure out why that is the way it is. But it hasn't come up as being necessarily an issue until we look at parking. And we'll get into that in a minute when I go through the criteria. The property is 14,374 square feet, or 0.33 acres. And as we mentioned, it's located right next door to the Lost Art Brewing. And it's actually also right across from the National Self-Storage Centers, which is the former D&W, which is now the indoor self-storage facility. And the existing building that's still sitting on that site was constructed in 1950. It's my understanding, though, that they were operating the Bud's Burgers business for way longer than since before 1950. And it was kind of a Walker landmark. I've heard a lot of stories about Bud's Burgers. It's kind of cool learning all that history. And so this lot is also a non-conforming lot by way of area. If a new lot were to be split today in the C3 zoning district, it would be, the minimum lot size would be required at 20,000 square feet, and also 150 feet of frontage. The frontage on this property is 95 feet. And so the other big piece to this is that the property owner received site plan approval for the redevelopment of this site on November 3rd of this year. And so this was a conditional site plan approval, subject to the condition that the applicant apply for a variance as it pertains to the number of parking spaces. And so that's why we're here tonight. So here's an image of the existing site conditions. It doesn't look exactly like this now because this photo was taken before the Lost Art Brewing site was fully completed. This is the site plan, and these are the parking areas that are proposed. So there are 5 parking spaces here, 9 parking spaces here, and the Planning Commission approved the outdoor seating area as a special exception use, and the ordinance requires that the Planning Commission approve or review it as a special exception use when the seating outside exceeds 20% of what's inside. So there's 12 seats inside, there's 32 seats outside. And the cross-access easement that Mark referenced in his findings from his application is right here. This is the one that we requested that he add during site plan review. And then here's, on this side of the property line is the one that's already in place from Lost Art. And this is in place so that people can lawfully travel from this curb cut and back behind this site. There's some more parking spaces back here for this site. But this building is really close, so if they were gonna go behind this site, it would be really hard for them to go on this side without having to go on the neighboring property. So I'm going to get right into the criteria here. You guys are probably familiar with this slide, and each parcel is different, it's unique, has its own set of variables. And so the first thing that we're looking at is whether or not the parcel that we're looking at has exceptional or extraordinary circumstances. And so does this property have exceptional circumstances such as challenging topography, some odd shape? A lot of the parcels along Remembrance Road have a triangle shape when you get further west, or just other variables that are not normally exhibited by other properties in the general vicinity and in the same zoning district. And then the preservation of rights part is, we're asking the question of, are there other properties of similar size in the same zoning district that are able to operate businesses with fewer parking spaces than required? Specifically, that's what we're looking at when we're trying to determine whether or not that criteria is met. The next one is whether or not what's being requested would pose a detriment on adjacent properties. So will the reduced number of parking spaces have a negative impact on neighboring properties? There's a number of different ways to look at this, and we'll get into that in just a minute. The last one, is it an issue that occurs so often that a need for a change in the variance is warranted? So does this type of request exist often enough to warrant a change in the zoning ordinance to prevent future variance applications? And I think most of the time when we really do an analysis of this criteria, we decide, yeah, maybe our ordinance does need a second look. But there's more to it with this. So in getting down to the details of this lot, and whether or not exceptional or extraordinary circumstances apply, we have a number of factors that could definitely contribute to unique or exceptional circumstances. So as we mentioned, this lot is dual zoned. This yellow area here is the area that's zoned A. This area here is the part that's zoned C3. The components to the business, such as the outdoor seating and the smoker and the building itself, are only permitted to be within this C3 portion. And they can't be permitted on this portion because it's not zoned for that. And, you know, the ordinance is silent on parcels that are dually zoned. I've seen some ordinances that have provisions for a percentage. If one zoning district takes up a certain percentage of the lot, then that zoning district shall prevail. We don't have anything like that in our zoning ordinance. And so what we have to do is only allow uses in the zoning districts on that parcel. And so the lot is also substandard size. I've mentioned this a couple different times now, where the lot is 0.33 acres, just under 15,000 square feet, where a new lot would be required to be 20,000 square feet. So just by way of size alone, it's hard to squeeze all that more than what's proposed here in terms of parking spaces. And it's also encumbered by cross-access easements. So we've got the easement here. We can't allow any parking in this area here. We've got the easement here. Can't allow any parking in this area here either. So those easements were put in place to help with access management and traffic circulation. So they're not available as an area to place parking spaces. And the other thing with this dual zone is that we still need to observe the buffer that's required between residential uses and non-residential uses. And you may have seen in my staff report, I provided a table that shows which buffer zone this particular lot would be subject to. So if you have C3 land uses up against land uses that fall within A, A2, SA, S, agricultural, or multifamily, we're looking at a type B buffer, which is 15 feet in width. So during the site plan approval or site plan review, we asked that the applicant provide some plantings in this area here. And I also have an image that shows, maybe I can bring that up real quick. Oops. So this image here shows, like, okay, why couldn't they provide a double parking row right here? Or a double row of parking? Well, our minimum aisle width is 26 feet. So 26 feet, you can see this dimension is from here to here. That's 26 feet. And if we had 18 foot or 17 and a half foot stalls, there physically isn't enough room to have a 26-foot drive aisle here and a 26-foot drive aisle here, with also preserving that 15-foot buffer between the commercial and residential land uses. So, you know, that was my first thought. Why couldn't we just have them add another row here and people could squeak around and it would be tight? But we obviously have minimum dimensions for parking spaces and parking areas for a reason, and that's so that cars can safely circulate through a parking lot without hitting things. So let's go back to this thing here. So in some cases, we only have one exceptional or extraordinary circumstance, like a lot being triangular in shape. A lot of times that's what leads to not being able to meet the letter of the ordinance for several reasons. Here we have 4 clear areas that make it hard for the letter of the ordinance to be met when it comes to parking numbers. So with that said, I believe this criteria has been met. And if we look at preservation of property rights, is there a substantial property right that would be denied if the variance is not granted to the applicant? If we look at other commercial businesses in particularly along the Remembrance corridor, that exist and are fully operational with fewer parking spaces than what's required, yes, there are other properties that are able to operate their business with fewer parking spaces. And so the owner's plan is to operate the restaurant in the same manner as the previous owner, who was able to operate a restaurant. It was kind of the Wild West when it came to parking, because there were no parking spaces, no stripes. There was also no curb there, and people could just pull in and just park wherever. And so, we have asked that the applicant, as part of site plan review, pave the parking lot, make that improvement, show us the parking calculations with the striping of the spaces on the lot, and we'll follow the ordinance from there. Well, the ordinance says that if you can't meet the parking space requirements, then you have to apply for a variance. And with the C3 zoning district, there's not a mechanism that allows the planning commission to say, if X, Y, and Z is met, then we can waive this parking requirement. Like there is, for example, in the Standale Downtown District, or in one of the planned unit development district, where there's more flexibility. And so here we are, looking at whether or not it would deny the owner a substantial property right if a variance is not granted for the parking numbers. So based on those items, I've given a table of some other businesses on the Remembrance corridor that are operating and fully functional with much fewer parking spaces than what is required if they were to be redeveloped. And I know that a couple of the businesses that I list in this table here in Figure 7 are ones that have been to the Planning Commission asking for a reduced number of parking spaces. I think the one that stands out, is the Rodenhouse Auto at 3690 Remembrance. They were granted a variance that allowed them to have 9 parking spaces where 18 was required. And again, a lot of the lack of space can be attributed to that expansion of Remembrance Road and that additional right-of-way taking up a lot of space for a lot of those parcels. And just the angle of Remembrance, not going straight north and south or east-west, and that's a lot of times what creates that nonconformity. Which was fine at the time in 1900 or whatever. So if we're looking at whether or not the lack of parking spaces is going to pose a detriment to adjacent property owners or health, safety, and welfare of residents and drivers in Walker, we feel that this redevelopment is an improvement to the area, and the Planning Commission approved the site plan conditionally with that in mind. The owner really has high hopes for this site to be a gathering space for the people that live in the surrounding neighborhoods. I've seen a lot of people talk on social media about Lost Art being that place for the community and the surrounding residential neighborhood. And fewer parking spaces would actually encourage more pedestrian travel. And we are slowly but surely moving in that direction because of a number of different variables. One of them being climate change. I mentioned in my in my report where cities and towns are moving toward less car-centric design. And the more pedestrian travel we can encourage, the better, especially in areas where we're trying to create some placemaking and a sense of place and a sense of community. And you know, the master plan sort of calls this area out as this gateway to Walker. And there's a design in there that's, you know, mixed use and very pedestrian friendly, lots of connectivity, and pedestrian pathways. And so if we're going to encourage that, and if that's what we want to see, long-term vision, then, you know, adding more parking isn't necessarily the answer. So you could look at this from a few different angles. If this place is really, really popular and people are still driving like crazy, you know, like today is, I know people that drive to downtown Rockford and they live around the corner. That's where I live. And I'm like, really, you drove down here? And so it's kind of a matter of personal preference, but if we can encourage more pedestrian travel by not building or designing sites that encourage car travel, then we might get to moving in the right direction. And I should also add that I looked at a lot of old ordinances in doing my research for this case. And since 1963, the ordinance has pretty much gone unchanged when it comes to parking. At one time, there were no parking regulations or no minimum requirements, and then the ordinance added language that based the minimum number of parking spaces on floor area of the building, not taking into account specific land uses. And so then, you know, a couple decades later, the number of seats was the determining factor for uses like a restaurant or a bar or a social type place. And so it's always been based on, this one, I can't remember the name of it. So it's like some engineering manual, but it's the same in a lot of communities, in terms of how many parking spaces are required based on XYZ land use. And so there's definitely some change that we might see with reducing parking numbers where it's appropriate. I don't think we can get rid of parking minimums altogether, but I think we're definitely going to move in that direction. So car-centric principles, ordinances have gone unchanged for decades. And then last, I feel like there still could be a shared parking agreement with Lost Art, and I think it should be pursued. It would have to be a private pursuit, because we can't necessarily require it. But if the two sites were able to share spaces, that could potentially take the heat off one or the other or both, depending on, how this all shakes out with, maybe his barbecue is not as good as he thinks it is. And maybe not a lot of people are going to drive there. Or maybe it's going to be really, really awesome and people are going to go there a lot. But they're also going to stop at his place and then go get a beer from Lost Art and maybe wander over to the outdoor seating if he can get the licensing through MLCC for that. But I don't see any reason why we can't encourage this reciprocal relationship, in terms of where what the city approves. So, those things said, I believe that criteria has been met. And then this not a general problem one, this is always tricky because people ask for variances from time to time. And it's, if it's something like, can I have a fence in a secondary front yard? I would say, yes, we definitely need to change the ordinance because people ask for that same variance all the time. And like I said, with the zoning ordinance rewrite, we're going to be looking at that. So asking for a reduced number of parking spaces is not something that we get every day. This is the first one I've seen since I've been with the city of Walker. It's only been just under 2 years, but I wasn't able to find a whole lot of variances in our history related to the parking numbers. So I saw one for Uccello's where they were proposing they wanted a reduction of like 35 spaces or something like that. And there was the one from Rodenhouse Auto that I was able to uncover, but I couldn't find a whole lot else.
There's one for Alfano's too, because they use shared parking
With Sobeys?
with the car wash.
Oh, with the car wash. Okay.
I don't know where Sobeys gets to park all their cars all over the place, but they do.
It's, yeah. So again, a rewrite of the zoning ordinance will definitely include changes to the parking section, because I feel like they're, just taking what we've had and just copying it and pasting it into a new zoning ordinance is not going to be a solution. We definitely have to take a look at the trends as far as land use and travel goes, so that we can allow uses like this, small businesses, without the need to have 1 million parking spaces. So based on that, I believe that this criteria is met. And I think I've gone through all the items that I wanted to bring to your attention. Oops. Oh, shoot. Here we go. So just a reminder that Section 94-59, granting of variances, requires that all criteria must be met in order for a variance to be granted. And it is recommended that the Zoning Board of Appeals take in all the information presented tonight into account when making their decision. So just a brief summary of the findings from my report. So Part A, exceptional extraordinary circumstances. The site is definitely substandard and is encumbered by a cross-access easement and is dual zoned. Preservation of property rights. There are other non-residential sites along the Remembrance corridor that are operational with fewer than required parking spaces. No substantial detriment. Allowing 12 parking spaces where 27 is required per ordinance will not be detrimental and could encourage pedestrian travel to the site. Not a recurring request. It's not currently a recurring request, however, an ordinance amendment is warranted to prevent future variance requests as older sites are redeveloped, particularly along Remembrance. So if the zoning board is inclined to grant the variance tonight, it is recommended that it be subject to the one condition that the parking spaces at 3381 Remembrance Road shall be constructed in accordance with the approved site plan dated 10/22/21, drawn by Feenstra and Associates. And that's all from me.
Okay, thanks, Tricia. Okay, can the applicant step to the microphone, please? And then state your name for us, if you would.
Sure, my name's Mark Stubbs.
Okay, glad to meet you. Is there anything you'd like to add that Tricia has said, or what I read into the record?
Sure, I think that, first of all, Tricia's pretty amazing. She has individually led me through this whole thing, right? I think when you have a vision of naively starting a restaurant, it's all you think about is cooking. That microphone,
Oh, push the button on the microphone.
Better?
Yep.
Can you please restate for the record that Tricia is amazing?
Tricia's amazing, yeah. You know, I think when you naively go down that path and you just think, man, how am I going to serve people? Who am I going to hire? All that stuff. You don't think of things like this. I mean, I'm just going to be blunt. It's been a great learning experience. Thank you for all your words. I think we've all learned a lot. I think the only thing I really want to leave you guys with is that this is my family. This is my wife, Melissa, and my daughter, Tyler.
Hi.
We have lived in Walker for over 30 years. In various places. We actually lived in the neighborhood that abutted, our property actually abutted Tim Sobey, so we know Tim and Teresa real well. And we love this area. We would never leave it, to be perfectly honest. We were part of the whole conversation about what to do with the Walker corridor, right? And the shrinking of the road. And why are we shrinking it? We're shrinking it to really bring pedestrians up and down that corridor, right? So we have a great bike path. We have a great bike path that leads up to it. We got a great city park. It's a beautiful little area. And so for me, even though you guys have to talk about it from a legality standpoint, which is cool, I will just say that the important thing to my family, because we're very social people, is that this is a social place. We are trying to create an environment where we used to live on Gridley, next to Tim Sobey, where we could, as a family, walk up there. We live on Walker Avenue now, just for the record, just south of Remembrance, so like 3 seconds from here. Wilson, sorry, did I say Remembrance? On Wilson. And so we're trying to create that, and it's, again, like I stated in my variance, it's really not about the money. It's about people being able to just go there and have a seat. I'm tired. I'm going to have a drink of water. I'm going to have my dog with me. I'm going to push a stroller up there. That's really what it is, truthfully. Had no idea that there would be parking limitations. So you all have to decide that, right? And I understand whatever decision you make is within what you guys have to make decisions for. But think about that a second from a community standpoint, because that's really what our vision is for that place. I think that's probably it. My only request is that you approve the proposal. Any questions of me? And just for the record, we did competition barbecue for 12 years, my wife and I, so it may not be perfect, but it's pretty good.
Purchased the property already?
Yeah, so good question. So I actually purchased the property, even though the record probably shows that it was purchased last year. I purchased it 6 years ago from Susan Goodwin, who was the widower of Bud. She had a cute little sign on the front of the building, all handwritten, that the property was for sale. And her and I met and shared a similar vision of trying to keep the place family-driven. I love Susan. I don't know if you've met her before. She's a lovely woman. But I've owned the building for 6 years. I transferred it into my LLC last year, or the year before. I can't remember which. That's why the record may show that it's only been owned for a year by me. So I've had it for 6 years. Any other questions?
Tricia, is there any leeway for seasonal seating? Because obviously this time of year, you're not gonna be sitting outdoors. Is that,
Well, so whenever there's outdoor seating, it has to be included in the parking
Regardless.
calculations, whether it's being used all year long or just part of the year. And we learned over the last couple of years that people want to use their outdoor seating to keep their business alive when there's public health orders on that restricts indoor occupancy.
okay, thank you. I was just a thought that, I'm like, this time of year. Have you talked to the people next door from the brewery, just out of curiosity? Have you had any conversation with them?
Yeah, so I've known Brad and Mike since they moved in. We have conversations all the time about vision. They have a very similar vision that I do, and it's really to create that community, create that social environment. I really desire to keep our businesses separate, right? As a small business owner, I've worked for businesses my entire life. I worked for Blackmer Pump. Today, I've worked there 21 years. This is really something that we want as a standalone business. So I know Lost Art comes up a lot in these conversations, but we are separate businesses, and who knows where they'll be in a year or 5 or 10.
That's true.
Yeah, and so even though there's some consideration on the table for more conversation about parking, there was a conversation we had with the planning committee last month about, well, can you knock on doors and see if you can have cars parked somewhere up. I really don't want to do that. There's certainly some legality there and some liability issues there. So again, for consideration, I would want you to consider it as a standalone business at this point.
Well, and I guess what I was thinking is that, if people come down Remembrance and they look over and they see you kind of full, and they're, that they might go, oh, there's some empty room there, are they gonna be like, this is ours, that's your, that kind of, or,
I see what you mean. I see what you mean. So the neat part about our businesses is that what we've talked about as a family, what we've talked with Brad and Mike about is they are our clientele. We're not looking at anyone that comes into that shared space. If somebody parks on my property, that's great. They're a potential customer right next door, and they're not intending to serve food. Their intention, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but their intention is probably to lose the food trucks and allow us to serve their customers. So there'd be a big open relationship there. Either people walk over and get some food and go over and have a beer, or they sit on my side and have food as well.
that's what I was wondering, not so much as a formal, just, how they would,
Yeah,
people start, you look and you see one place is full and you go, there's a spot, and so.
yeah. Anyone that comes on that property, from my perspective, other than alcohol coming onto my property, because we have a license for that, is open for food consumption.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Anybody got any questions?
In the design of the site plan, just curious, where would a dumpster go?
Yeah, so really good question. So there is a dumpster next to the outbuilding behind Lost Art right now that they are using. I'm not exactly sure how to manage that. I'm just being blunt. Again, this is all a little bit new to me. In hindsight, maybe I should have asked Feenstra to consider that. The truth of it is that our business in the beginning, when we first open, is going to be pretty short on hours. So we're still talking about a Friday, Saturday. The amount of waste that we're going to produce in that amount of time is going to be fairly small. And we may be able to manage it with cans at that point in some type of hidden area somewhere around that back of that building. We just haven't quite figured that out yet.
Tom, I should add that I think was something that was missed on the site plan. Because I think we were so focused on the parking and the vehicle circulation here that, you're right, there should be a dumpster there. But we have other sites that share dumpsters with, a neighbor.
Yeah.
That's something that could be worked out, but a lot of times it's through an easement or something like that, some kind of an agreement. But we can certainly talk about that
Yeah,
further.
I would think that could be worked out very, the health department's gonna ask me the same question, so at some point I've gotta address that, absolutely. Good question.
Matter of public health, not a matter of
Yeah.
quantity of garbage.
Yeah,
It's probably gonna require some kind of an enclosure.
thank you for that.
I have a question. Might as well go through my list. Number one was the dumpster and the enclosure, and I can't believe the site, our planning commission is, but.
Roger, can you turn on your mic, please?
But, just for clarification, on the buffer zone, according to the 94-344, you have to provide a 15-foot buffer. Who's responsible for the buffer? The C3 or the A?
The C3 for sure.
So where we have the buffer is all on A. We don't have enough room for a buffer between C3 and A, because the buffer for C3 is almost at the back of the building. If you look at where the two properties, the two zoning ordinances are split. So is there a problem with that?
So I can speak to that, Roger. The table that has the buffer, no, I can't find that page. The buffer requirements specifies zoning, here it is, adjacent zoning district or land use. And in this case, we have to look at land use. So you've got one side that's got a residential land use and the other side that is all a non-residential land use. So we wouldn't expect a buffer between the C3 zoned area and the A zoned area.
So you're going by land use, not by zoning district?
Right.
Okay, that was a question. The other question is, they're allowing for 12 spaces. And as sure as I'm sitting here, I know at least 2 vehicles are gonna park in front of the building parallel to the sidewalk. Is there a reason we can't stripe those 2 spots out there? Because they're gonna park there. And that's to the southeast of where the food truck always sits now. Because even with that access easement across the front of the building, there is room to parallel park. Even if you add that grass, you could get 2 cars in there, allowing you 14 parking spaces. And I guess I would rather see that, and according to our ordinance, you can have parking in the right-of-way. As far as I know, that hasn't changed. And it's not actually on the street parking, but it's still off-street parking. But you could add 2 more spots along there. And I guess rather than have people try to park in there either on an angle or something, I'd rather see it parallel park one behind the other, away from where the entrance drive is, you know, to allow enough room there so that it works well with the traffic flow. So there's a possibility there of adding 2 more spaces. And I'd hate to see no parking signs put up along there either. And I've gone through a lot of these hearings with different businesses along Remembrance, and I'm totally not opposed to reducing the number of parking spaces, but I'd like to make it as functional as possible. And if you have an extra 2 there, you may not have as many of your customers in the neighbor's lot. And one of the issues, Trish and I were talking a little before the meeting, is the actual use of the brewery has changed since we granted their variance. And I'm not sure if Trish is in the position of having them come back before the board. Because when we granted their variance, it was for the brewery and a tasting area.
That's what I remember.
When I stopped on the way here tonight, there was at least 10 cars there, maybe 12, and they were parked up next to your building. And so it's like, to me, the tasting room is kind of gone by the side. They've added the food truck, they've got outdoor dining. We never did any landscape buffers on that site, and there was never a parking requirement. Now they got away with, because at the time they came, they weren't really under the jurisdiction of a bar or a restaurant or anything, so there was no parking requirement except for employees. And at that time, there was sufficient parking for all of that. So I don't know if, it's like Tricia said, maybe we can come up with a workable agreement on even some shared parking. I understand the liability issue on that. But if between the 2 sites, there has to be some adjustment to parking, they have more land than you do. It's just like I was saying over here with Alfano's Pizzeria. They got a shared parking agreement with the car wash behind, and may have even gotten some into that lot behind that. I don't know. I don't think National owns that little strip mall in there, do they? But there's a lot of shared parking that goes on between Sobeys and Alfano's and the car wash, and you know, that is kind of wherever's available to park. But so that was some of my concerns with adding those parking spaces, the dumpster, and that we've got the buffer in the right place.
Mr. Chairman, I had just a couple comments. I think that, in my mind, there was 2 things, and one of them kind of parallels Roger's concern is, you know, we get along now, right? I mean, the brew house and the barbecue get along right now. Well, I guess the thing that really bothers me is looking down the road, we want both these businesses to be successful. Both properties may change hands, and I guess I just really, really want to be comfortable that we're not gonna get called out there in the future with parking issues like we do in the Standale DDA on occasions, even though we have plenty of parking. But because there are some really hard feelings that happen, and there are some stuff that can go on with this parking down the road. So I guess that was one of my concerns, and I think it's, if we can add a couple more, that'd be great. Secondarily, you know, you've talked about Sobeys, we've talked about car wash, we talked about Alfano's. We do have that big parking lot from the former D&W, which now is the storage place. Some of the thoughts that I had today was, you know, it is across the street. Maybe there's some stuff we could do there. And maybe the city could stripe a crosswalk if we needed to and hit a location or something. I'm hoping you're the best successful barbecue on the west side, and you're packed on weekends forever. So maybe there's some other options. I know Remembrance isn't like Lake Michigan Drive. And I think, like Trish was saying too, with all the traffic in Standill, I really see people gonna wanna, our community's gonna wanna go someplace that's not like our new Interstate 45. So I don't think Remembrance Road is that busy to cross safely, hopefully, and no one would get hurt. But if that was an opportunity, maybe we could help them out with some kind of a crosswalk thing or something to get across the street. And I'm not sure, is there another street with a crosswalk close to there? I'm really not sure.
No,
We gotta go to right.
you gotta go up by the Dairy Queen to get to the next street that comes, and that's
But anyway,
just a short.
I'm for everything, and I'm ready to approve the whole blasted thing, but I just really am, if we could add a couple more, and I just wanna make sure down the road here, the brewery moves out or something happens or these guys aren't as friendly today
Well,
as
the
they
other-
are today, that we have something to
In-
keep
in-
us out of trouble.
In addition to what you're talking about there, and maybe Tricia has some insight on this one, it's like 2 doors down to the southeast, there's that other restaurant there. Is that actually a business restaurant, or is that a family thing, or what? Because there's no sign on the building tells you what it is, but I don't remember them coming in for parking variance or anything either.
I'm not even sure what you're talking about.
Just 2 doors south.
2 doors to the south.
Okay.
In fact, I turned around in that driveway tonight.
Looks like
There's
30
people in there eating in a restaurant.
Yeah, it looks like 3363 Remembrance.
Okay.
There's a restaurant in there.
Okay.
I have no idea how it got in there. There's no signing on the building, but they are definitely in there serving people food.
Do you know anything about that?
It's called the Latin House. It's been there.
Oh.
It's an ethnic.
Okay.
I
It's
don't
been
know if
there.
it's a club
No, it's
or a restaurant or,
it's a restaurant open to the public. It's called the Latin House. They serve South American food.
is it open to the public?
Yeah, it is actually. I've almost ordered lunch from there like 1,000 times, but I haven't. But they had different hours. I think because of the pandemic, their hours got reduced. But yes, you can Google them. They're an established restaurant. I don't know how long they've been there.
Within the last, I would say, 2 years, they've gotten in there. So I don't know what the situation was to them getting in there, or if they ever came for a review, or
Yeah.
they must have came for a business
So-
license of some kind, but,
They probably did. So the reason why,
because they don't have much parking either.
well, the reason why Mark is caught in this huge web of bureaucracy is because he wanted to add the outdoor seating, which is what prompted the site plan review. So he had to have special exception use because the floor area of the building is pretty small. And so the floor area, or the area of the outdoor seating would exceed that 20%. And so that's what put him in a situation where he had to go before the planning commission for site plan approval. And usually when people go to the planning commission for site plan approval, when it's a redevelopment of an existing site, that's the city's opportunity to, ask for some of these other improvements like landscaping, and let's update your approach to the public street. This is our opportunity to slowly bring these old sites into compliance with the ordinance. And so the people at the Latin House, there may have been a restaurant in that structure, that building.
I think that was a barber shop before.
Was it? We don't really have any way of knowing unless they apply for a business license.
So we've got 3 businesses, one serving drinks, one gonna serve barbecue, and one serving Latin cuisine. And we don't have any control over any of it, doesn't sound like.
Nice area.
I hate to bring it up, but
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens under the radar that we, land use that we have regulations for, but if we don't know about it, then we don't know about it. And,
this is on our gateway to Walker, and we're looking at the main highway into the city.
yeah, I get what you're saying, Roger. I guess from a zoning enforcement standpoint, our zoning enforcement specialist isn't driving around looking for violations.
No, but there should be some in-house talk between the people who issue business licenses
Well, there is.
and the planning zoning administration.
There is. That is
This-
one good
this
way to catch
building's
it.
It should have been caught there. He's going to apply for a business license. The brewery applied for a business license. The Latin House must have applied for a business license.
Well, I can only speak to what's happened on my watch since I've
Well, I
been here.
know.
But our process when a business license comes in is the application comes into the clerk's office, and then the deputy clerk sends that application out to the various departments within the city to make sure that the business complies with zoning, fire, police. She doesn't send it to the building official, but I do look at that. I look at, okay, is this a different land use than what was here before? Is this something that we need to look at to put these people on the hook for
'Cause there
additional improvements?
Used to be a barber shop along there, and then at one time it may have been a real estate developer that had his office in there. So I'm not sure. One of those smaller buildings, it might be the long one next to yours, it was a real estate at one time, or still is. But
I can certainly look into that to see.
But the Latin they were definitely serving people tonight.
So, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, again, I mean,
Okay.
I would appreciate a positive decision tonight. That's really where I'm at.
Okay.
Any questions from you?
Do we have to go back to site plan to get a dumpster location? Or to add those 2 parking spots, or is that something that
So
we can get the client to agree to or something?
they've already had their site plan approval subject to this variance being granted. The zoning board can add conditions. I have a little bit of a concern with asking him to place private parking spaces in the public right-of-way. I would definitely want to bring in our DPW director to ask if that's even possible. But the other piece related to that little strip that has the note that says saw cut and remove this pavement and then replace with topsoil and seed. Yeah. So they don't have any stormwater controls on the site. So when you go to the planning commission for site plan review, stormwater is one of the things that we look at. Okay, what's this site looking like for stormwater controls? Does it have any? Do we require, as part of this site plan review, that they come into compliance with the stormwater ordinance? And the city engineer has there's a policy that they adhere to, but they have the ability the planning commission has the ability to grant a stormwater variance. And so one of the reasons for taking out that piece of pavement there is to sort of offset the impervious.
He can do that and not affect the parking, because that's gonna line up that piece of grass with what the brewery has now. And there's still room to park 2 cars parallel to the sidewalk behind that new grass, and still have room between that and the building. That's what I'm saying.
I think that, I don't know. I don't know if that's a drive aisle. The previous owner definitely had that space for parking.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't lawful, like I said, it was the Wild West. They just
Well,
pulled in
and
wherever.
there are people
And that
who-
sidewalk wasn't there or anything.
There are people who park at the brewery and park parallel to the sidewalk. And his place is not gonna be any difference, it's just 2 more spaces down.
One of the things that, if I could speak to real quick, when you mentioned the brewery and their parking spaces, and have we approached them with coming back to the zoning board to have a new set of eyes on the use now? So there was a condition in Dan Power's staff report that said that if the site expands in the future, or if the business attracts more patrons than currently anticipated, or if the interior layout changes in the future to accommodate an expansion of service uses, parking may become an issue. And so at the time of site plan review or site plan approval for that site, they had the number of parking spaces that met the uses that they were proposing, but they also had 7 parking spaces that were considered deferred, and they weren't required to be striped. But they're there, like the space for those parking spaces, I think are covered in crushed asphalt, but they're not, I think they're being used. And so, yeah, we could require them to pave those parking spaces and stripe them so they could be more visible. But I know that people are parking in that area where the deferred parking is. And so when you add that 7 parking spaces and you look at the use on a per seat basis, because remember before it was looked at as sort of a manufacturing use and a retail sales use. So if we look at it from a per seat basis, the number of parking spaces that they have, including those 7 deferred spaces, they actually do comply with the zoning ordinance.
But they never came back.
They didn't.
When he wanted to add outdoor dining, I don't see the difference between outdoor dining and outdoor drinking.
So
And they have picnic tables all the way
I know.
across the front of their building.
I can tell you that that is the result from the ordinance that we passed to allow temporary outdoor restaurant seating. As a result of the pandemic.
They were never a restaurant.
Well, it's something that the MLCC was allowing, and you've seen in Grand Rapids and in Rockford, people are having these social districts and.
Barriers out in the street.
Yep. And so the MLCC was being a little bit flexible with their rules on where people could consume alcohol. And they were permitting outdoor areas. And they were, and basically, if you look at that section of our ordinance that we sort of passed, and it wasn't over, we drafted it, went to the ordinance committee, and then it came to the planning commission, then city commission, it was approved. And that was like a little over a year ago. It's really kind of loose. It's really like, if you wanted to take up this many parking spaces to have your outdoor seating area that is temporary because of the occupancy limitations, you can do that. And if you have to park on somebody else's property, you can do that. Just have to make sure you have their permission. It's not your typical ordinance language, because it doesn't feel all that regulatory. But we passed it in an effort to follow suit with what the MLCC was doing with opening up the flexibility with their regulations as a result of the pandemic and just trying to keep businesses alive.
But at some point, the city has to get a handle on
We do.
what those restrictions are, because the next step is when the next time they impose capacity limits because of the COVID, you're gonna have every business in Walker with their outdoor sales out on the parking lot and the sidewalk. They're
We-
gonna move it out. They
We
will.
did. We saw a lot of outdoor activity.
Right.
And there were some areas where it wasn't really an issue, but in other areas, it was some businesses posed sort of a fire hazard with the type of material they were using to enclose their outdoor areas.
Right.
So we kind of tackled that on a case-by-case basis, weird times. And so we definitely, it was definitely a learning experience for all the different departments and private property owners that were involved. But with the Lost Art outdoor seating area, their thing expires at the end of the month. So they won't be able to have their outdoor seating area without going through the same process that Mark has gone through with the planning commission to get approval for the outdoor seating.
So chances are they will be coming back.
Well, if
They know
if
that expires?
yes, they do. Yep, we've been in very close contact with them, and I've had a lot of conversations with them, and so I've been keeping them in the loop the whole way, and so when it comes time for them to pursue outdoor seating and go to the planning commission for a special exception use, they're gonna also be on the hook for having those seats counted toward, are you guys taking a selfie right now?
I'm coming up with a strategy.
Having those seats counted toward their parking. But by that time, we might have our parking ordinance amended, and so it could be different for this area. Maybe there will be an overlay over here with, not the same parking formula or parking calculations that apply to every other commercial area.
Well, I notice now down off of where Walker turns into Stocking down there, where they had all half the street blocked off.
If you'd like to sit down, go
Tables
ahead.
out there, they've taken all that out of the road now, for the winter anyway. So the snowplows can get through, because
Yeah.
they had the big concrete barriers through there. That's all gone now, so.
I got a couple questions on the motion. Do we have to specifically say 12 parking spots where 27 are required? And do we have to have the condition? Because I feel like by the time this gets implemented, something might change. Because it could be 14, it could be 11 by the time it all gets done. Can't we just have a motion for reduced parking and then defer to the planning commission?
Well, the planning commission has already approved the plan. So when the motion is open-ended without a specific measure or number of parking spaces, then, he could say, screw it, I'm gonna only build 5. So I think it's important to keep it specific to the 12, where 27 is required per the ordinance. You could add some conditions, though, that, if you feel strongly about him having to go back to the planning commission to work on a different parking solution, or if you feel strongly about having him seek more opportunities for shared parking, you know, you can certainly add that on. I should add that we did talk about, it was brought up at the planning commission meeting, the national storage centers across the street. Giant parking lot being used by 4 U-Haul trucks and, you know, not really much else. So it would seem like a natural thing, but we gave him the option of, hey, you could either reach out to these people and see if they would be willing to do a shared parking agreement with you, or you could take your chances at the zoning board of appeals, and they could grant a variance for a reduced number of parking spaces. You still have the opportunity to pursue shared parking agreements, but with the variance, you wouldn't necessarily have to, unless a condition was imposed.
I see. I'm trying to give them some flexibility.
Can we do
So
that with a
go-
minimum of 12 as shown on the site plan?
Yeah, no less than 12.
No
I
less-
get
no less than
concerned if,
12.
you know, if they don't do the curb cut exactly the way that is, you know, do they have to go back around? Or if the health department says, well, you know, scooch that over or remove this space or add one to the front, but take one from the back so you can do this or that, then we're just gonna be in a looping.
You mean for the dumpster?
Could be.
That's what I was thinking.
I just don't want them to have to loop around back to the planning commission, then back to the zoning, and then back to the planning commission.
Right, I don't either. There's certain things that I can approve administratively without having to send them back to the planning commission. If they wanted to add more than 5 parking spaces, they would need to go back to the planning commission. But if they were only adding 1 or 2 parking spaces, where it would work, then they wouldn't have to go back to the planning commission. Parking in the right of way, I definitely want to look to see what's possible there. I do know that in our discussions during the site plan review committee, we talked about making sure that there were parking stops. I think it was along this area here, so that cars couldn't park in this spot, or maybe it was over here. I can't remember exactly. There was a couple different iterations of this plan, and I think originally there was parking out front, and then we asked, hey, can we get you to put this cross-access easement in here? And he agreed to it, but it's, you know.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I mean, I always parked right outside the front door when I went there years ago. Got my donut and coffee.
It's not
Yeah.
buds anymore.
Well, I know, but there's 2 or 3 more, or even if you did an angle parking there, I mean, yeah, it's a little bit in that access agreement, but it's not really in the right of way. I really think, I feel comfortable with the 12, and I think, you know, they're gonna park in front of that building. I mean, somebody's,
Well, he's
unless
o-
you put a
he's only-
barricade there.
He's only responsible for what's on his property. And his property, based on his site plan, shows the 12. If they add them into the right-of-way, which would have to be
That's a
okayed
bonus.
through Trish's connections, to add those extra ones along parallel to the sidewalk, that's in the right-of-way. That's not your responsibility, although you're gonna make him pave that.
Well, that's already paved. This whole right-of-way area is paved, and it's new-ish since 2015. But I kind of am starting to look at this cross-access easement and wondering if it really needs to be this far over. You know, like this could be revised so that it wasn't right here. And you could potentially squeeze a space in here. Or you could move your smoker over slightly, push the seating back. These things are all things that I could approve administratively. It would be an amendment to a site plan. We would ask that he would give us a a revised site plan in accordance with the recommendations that we've made. But he doesn't necessarily have to go back to the planning commission.
So, can I ask Tom a question, Mr. Chairman? So, are you concerned that he might have to lose a spot for a dumpster?
I want to
Or
bring
something?
flexibility.
So could we,
Instead of this plan, 12 spots.
so could we give you the latitude, or the city the latitude
Right,
to
like
eliminate one more and go down to
Well,
11?
Unless so modified, maybe by the planning commission or administratively.
Is that would that help your concern?
Can the dumpster go in that buffer space? If it
The
goes
buffer
over there,
space?
if it goes
Oh.
over there on the northwest corner where he's got that, looks like a construction dumpster in there now. It's a long skinny thing.
This one?
Yeah,
Or-
up against that building over, way up in the top. Okay, go up, go north.
There you
now,
go.
Right there. There's a dumpster right now, but it's a long green one. Looks like a construction dumpster. And
I mean, I don't see why so when you look at where to put a dumpster, you also have to think about, okay, is there gonna be enough room here for a garbage truck to circulate way to the back?
chances are the garbage truck's gonna come in the driveway from the brewery and use the shared access between the buildings,
I mean, this would be an okay spot for the dumpster.
as long as you have room to back up out of that last space, that last parking space.
We could work this out with having Randy Feenstra provide some truck turning templates to make sure that it would work if we have you place a dumpster somewhere in there. Like you said, the health department is gonna ask you to have some sort of receptacle.
Receptacle and an enclosure probably.
Yeah, the zoning requires the enclosure. It's like a 6-foot opaque fence or masonry wall. So back to the parking spaces, if you say you want to see a minimum of 12 parking spaces, that would be an appropriate number to add into the motion.
I'm fine with the plan. It's just I don't want to inconvenience the applicant anymore.
Yeah.
If we have these little nuances.
I don't foresee this having to come back to the planning commission or the ZBA, depending on how you craft your motion and the conditions that you add.
Okay,
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
okay. Motion to close public hearing,
I'll second.
second by Randy. All in favor of closing public hearing?
Aye.
Aye. No opposed? Hearing's closed.
Give us your motion. Come on.
Yep.
Give us your motion.
I move to approve the request for a dimensional variance to allow for 12 parking spaces where 27 is required per section 94-467. Table of off-street parking spaces at 3381 Remembrance Road Northwest for Smoke Shack Barbecue based on the following findings of fact. Exceptional or extraordinary circumstances that the site is substandard and is encumbered by a cross-access easement and dual zoning, preservation of property rights, that there are other non-residential sites along the Remembrance corridor that are operational with fewer than required parking spaces. No substantial detriment, that allowing 12 parking spaces where 27 is required per ordinance will not be detrimental and could encourage pedestrian travel to the site. Not a recurrent request, because there's not currently a recurrent request. However, an ordinance amendment is warranted to prevent future variance requests as older sites are redeveloped. We have one condition, that the parking spaces at the site be constructed in accordance with the site plan as approved. on 10/22/21 by Feenstra and Associates, drawn by.
Have a motion by Tom, do we have a second?
I'll support.
Third by Pat,
Patrick?
okay. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, it's passed.
That was the best work I've seen in a while.
Yeah, we're gonna need your signature up here with,
I need a signature. You wanna sign this first, Mr. Chairman? You get to sign that
really? I give him,
one right there.
thank you, sir.
I got it right here first. I'll give you a copy here.
When do you think you'll be open?
Well, this has caused a little bit of time.
Barring this,
I really want to be open this spring, but it might be late summer. If I can get that out there.
looks nice already.
Thank you.
And you get a copy. Cause they don't give me the other kind anymore.
Comes from being carbon dated.
So I'll touch base with you and we'll try to figure
You
something
catch it all the time, Tom.
out for you. Whether or not
You know what?
like,
And I knew it going, I'm sitting there looking at it going, shit, but we're so into it at this time, I'm like, and Bob's done it before too, where you kind of stops everything, and I'm like, it just sounds out of place at this point, so I'm just like, and I thought, Tom always catches it, he
It's
always
been,
catches it.
it might have been drafted, I think Randy drafted it, but
So it just rolled in from him, and then we rolled into like our own discussion, so it just, I'm like, where do you throw it in?
that's one of the conditions.
I went through that too.
Version of that.
Yeah, that's what, there was like,
Let's take a look to see where we feel to squeeze another spot and your dumpster location. Maybe have Randy do some truck
Then we can get things back under control.
well, I'm gonna hear every 6 months.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
You bet.
Congrats.
Great night.
Good luck. Get the menu out there.
Don't forget to work on a meatless barbecue option.
Meatless barbecue. What's that, a bun?
Don't do that on my account.
For Roger, as for Roger.
I'm a meat eater.
Barbecue tofu.
A tofu barbecue?
Thank you.
That doesn't even sound right.
So I just have one item to bring up under staff comments. Laura and I were looking at setting the meeting dates for 2022. And because we've been able to keep the number of meetings to a minimum, because I try to do a lot of counseling before people officially apply for a variance, to try to dissuade them from applying for a variance if I really don't think that they can meet the criteria. You know, obviously their due process is their right, and they can apply regardless of what I counsel them. But we're talking about going down to 1 meeting a month. So when we set those meeting dates for 2022, adding only 1 meeting a month instead of 2. Just wanted to run that past you and see if you'd be okay with that.
So it'd be a lengthier meeting, perhaps.
Perhaps if we had a lot of applicants that we had to put on the agenda,
We could add a special meeting,
we could once in a while add a special meeting.
special meeting.
Yeah, that's fine.
I know we don't have everybody here, so we could also, bring this up again in January, but
We have a quorum.
it's true.
Does it make more sense just to keep the 2 and you just try to do them all the first one or the second, I mean, instead of just doing one, or?
They use one as a backup.
You know, we kinda do that at Board of Review, we have all kinds of time slots, but we try to get them all in the first I don't know if that's,
If you think that makes more sense, I can certainly do that.
I mean,
We haven't really had an issue, but we were just looking at the meeting dates and, you know, we looked at the ordinance to see if there was a requirement to have 2 meetings a month. And it looks like the ZBA is able to set the schedule, so,
I mean, could we just
We can
set
keep
up
it as
one a
2,
month?
and if we don't need one, we'll just do like we have.
Yeah, and if
Just
if
keep
the
it as
agenda gets
2.
too big, yeah. Okay.
If we don't, if you can cram it all in the first meeting, fine.
okay,
Now we're doing 1 a quarter.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying really hard.
She wants to schedule one every 3 months, guys.
Okay, so we'll keep it at 2 meetings a month for the schedule. So we'll make the deadline, thing reflect 2 meetings a month.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay, motion to
I
adjourn.
make a motion to adjourn.
Roger,
I support.
Pat, okay, all in favor? Aye, we're adjourned.
Everybody have a good holiday.
You too.
You guys as well. So we don't have another meeting in December.